All right, hello everyone. Welcome to, I believe this is week 4. This week we're going to be talking about pathways to terrorism. All right, so understanding who will or who will not become a terrorist is extremely important. All right, since 9/11, the attacks on 9/11, there's been a lot of resources dedicated to that particular task. All right, trying to figure out who will be a terrorist and who isn't. So this approach, in trying to determine who these potential terrorists are, it's been a very interdisciplinary kind of approach. It's involved professionals from and researchers from a variety of fields like international relations, criminal justice, psychology, sociology, as well as in the field professionals as well. So during this time, there's been this concerted focus on radicalization and the possible pathways to terrorism. One issue concerning radicalization is that in the United States and other Western countries, simply harboring what are considered to be radical views is not only not illegal, but is protected, especially in the United States. In the United States, someone could be as radical as they want to be, as long as they don't act upon those beliefs and harm someone else. Western Europe is fairly similar in this regard, but not quite the same as the United States. So then the question becomes, how do you separate those who harbor extremist views that will take the next step and become terrorists from those that harbor similar extremist views but will never take the next step to become a terrorist? So the readings this week address this very question. So as you read these articles, think about what this means from a Homeland Security perspective. What are the implications for policy and for enacting that policy? Obviously, law enforcement would have to be involved, but how? Are there non-law enforcement options that could address this issue? And then remember, there's always only a finite amount of resources that are available. So how would those resources be best utilized? All right, so first I'm going to discuss Taylor and Horgan article. John Horgan has spent the better part of his career studying not only how people become radicalized, but also how do you de-radicalize people and remove them from an extremist or terrorist lifestyle. So they begin kind of discussing frameworks for people engaging with terrorism. And the main question they pose is, why do some people choose to participate in terrorism and others not when they have a similar background? Is it simply a matter of opportunity? So certainly, obviously somebody that doesn't have the opportunity to participate in terrorism cannot. But why does one person figure out a way to do it when another person doesn't? So as you get in this article, you're going to realize there's a lot of information contained in the article. So I'm just going to kind of briefly touch on what it's about here. The main contribution to the article is that it lays out a potential process model to help understand paths taken by individuals to terrorism. So figure 1 on page 590 outlines potential pathways. Then they kind of simplify the model a little bit with figure 2 on page 591. So take some time to examine the two models within the context that they present. So the main conclusions are that there's not only there isn't one particular route to terrorism. They're all individual routes, and this is what makes it so difficult to determine who will and who will not become a terrorist. The other problem is processes change over time. So it's very fluid. If you think about just yourself and your personal life, things that impacted you or motivated you have changed over time, right? Your belief systems have changed a little bit over time. Things change over time. So these processes that people go through, we talk about radicalization, terrorism, those things also change over time based on individual circumstances. So then another way to kind of think about this article is under the framework of the rational choice perspective, where consequences related to behavioral choice influences behavior and also influences changes in behavior. All right, so that's Horgan, or Taylor and Horgan, kind of real quick in a nutshell. All right, so the second article that I want to discuss is Hafez and Mullins. So they kind of reject what Horgan says and what other scholars have said, this whole contention that radicalization is a process. They believe that there are certain factors involved with radicalization, They refer to it as a puzzle, but that these pieces are interdependent. So much like a puzzle, each of the pieces are independent pieces, but they have parts of the other pieces, if that makes sense. That's how they fit together, right? Each of these pieces has a part from another piece, and they kind of form together to form this larger piece. So the pieces they identify are grievances, networks, ideologies, and enabling environments and social structures. So grievances are things like marginalization, cultural alienation, deeply held beliefs of victimization, or strong disagreements. Networks are like pre-existing relationships between individuals and radicals. Networks offer opportunities for socialization processes to occur, and then you have things like peer pressure, groupthink, and ideological encapsulation occur, which then kind of entrap individuals into this mindset or into this lifestyle. So then you have ideologies, and these are kind of the master narratives about the world and one's position in it. Ideologies will frame grievances into these broader kind of political critiques of the status quo, and they use ideologies to demonize enemies and to justify violence. Then finally, you have enabling environments and social structures, and these are the physical and virtual environments within which these individuals exist. It could be something like the internet, it could be social media, it could be prisons. There's a variety of things that could all fall within this enabling environment and social structures. So they kind of lay those out early, and then they discuss each of those in much greater detail within the article. So be sure you read all those and think about all those pieces, and also think about how does their discussion differ from Taylor and Horgan. Because as you build knowledge, and these research articles get published and people read them, they should build on one another. And if they critique one another, they need to have viable critiques. So think about how this one's different than Horgan, but also how maybe they interact. All right, so in the final article I'm going to discuss is Crone. Crone makes four main parts in the article. The first is that prior experience with violence can be a precondition for terrorist violence. Now, the prior experience of violence, not ideological violence, just regular, I won't say regular violence because there's no such thing, but, just kind of traditional, what you think of as criminal violence. The second is that pathways that utilize a religious pathway is actually political and not religious. Okay, so these are actually political pathways under the guise of religious pathways. Then the third is that radicalization is a social process, that radicalization does not occur like in a vacuum. And then finally, radicalization implies changing the capabilities of the person. All right, so traditional radicalization studies suggest that future terrorists move through a process whereby they gradually become more extreme and embrace a more extreme ideology, and that eventually may choose to commit violence. So it's kind of this drawn out, kind of long process. Crone argues that, while that may be true in some circumstances, it also is possible that those with prior violent experience or violent criminals more or less simply transform or transition into another form of violence by embracing an extremist ideology. And they may not even fully embrace the ideology. They simply found a better cause for their violent tendencies. Excuse me. Much of the discussion, too, about radicalization focuses on religious radicalization. And terrorism related to religion is rarely about pure religion. Those of you that had my summer class, Religion and Terrorism, found that most of the time you're talking about political aims, that religion is drawn into. So religion is often the gateway through which these political aims are pursued. Crone suggests that radicalization is a political process rather than a religious process. So if you examine pretty much any of the religious terrorist groups, you'll always find political goals within the ideology. Religion adds to it, but generally the aims are more often political than they are religious. Crone also argues radicalization does not occur in a vacuum. That's a social process. There are various forms that the social aspect of radicalization can take. Some are more formal. Some are much less formal, such as just some loose connections within an environment that's favorable to radicalization. It could be something much more formal, but it could just be a group of individuals just kind of hanging out, running around, running into each other places. All right, so finally, Crone argues that radicalization, while it has cognitive characteristics, a large part of radicalization is also learning physical characteristics, learning the skills of terror. Talking about things like shooting, fighting, bomb making, right? Those are all things that someone who's going to transition into terrorism needs to know. Okay, and this could also be a reason why former criminals make good recruits. Okay, they already possess some of these necessary physical attributes. All right, so then as you look at your syllabus, you'll see that there's another article. This one right here. I'm not going to get into this one. Essentially, this article has 15, I think it's 15, different theories that try to explain terrorism. So went and discussed 15 psychology, sociology, variety of theories are listed in there, and then there's discussion about how each of them applies to terrorism. I'm not going to go into this because literally we could do a video of this length for each of those theories. So it turned into an entire series of videos. But be sure to read them and think about how each of those theories applies to each other, and then also how it applies to the readings from this week. So that's it for this week. Be sure to do all the assignments that are due for this week. And if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll see you next week.